So with that, let me kick it off and send it over to Janelle from Sidecar.
Thank you, Gretchen. I appreciate that. It's great to be here today, everybody. I'm going to start casting right now. Okay. So as promised, I'm going to take a closer look at content marketing strategy during this time of COVID-19, and also just for greater context today, for those of you who aren't super familiar with Sidecar and our audience, we are a marketing technology company. We work with the retail industry only. Our audience is digital marketers within these retail organizations. So essentially, I have been a marketer marketing to other marketers, which has been a very interesting and insightful way to go about my own day-to-day. So the agenda of my session, I want to cover three major aspects of content marketing and in light of the past couple months: storytelling, channels, and what I call your North Star. The best practices that I think ring true whether we are going through a pandemic or not. So let's kick it off first with storytelling. The goal here, as you think about the dynamic nature of this pandemic, is to be able to shift your storytelling to align with rapid change. And the way I'm going to start talking about all of these aspects is I want to give an anecdote of how we at Sidecar have handled some of these facets, and then move into some takeaways that I think other companies, especially in B2B and in technology, can take away. These are not necessarily perfect. I'm not saying that these are like the paragons that you need to aspire to, but I hope that they are inspirational and that they're ideas for the folks out there. So, storytelling. How did we start to shift our storytelling to align with the rapid change and how things were unfolding so quickly, going back to March? We started with a survey. We surveyed our customers. We also surveyed our internal teams that are externally facing, so sales team and customer success team. And we asked just a handful of open-ended questions along the lines of, what questions are coming to mind for you as these events unfold? What are some of the challenges that are top of mind for you? And then again, kind of tweaked that question and framed it up like for the sales team and for the customer success team in terms of, what are you hearing from our customer base? What are you hearing from our prospect base? So that we could get information from a couple different angles. And that was how we were able to measure our audience's information needs right off the bat. This was all happening the first week of the lockdown. It was really key in how we could understand the concerns, the questions that were coming up, and also the tone around it, because you could glean insights into sort of the connotation of how we were getting these responses, and that really positioned us to take our next step. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what that next step was, but I want to pause and just kind of examine the act of doing this survey and some of the lessons that I think other people could take away from that example. So again, the goal here is shifting your storytelling to align with rapid change. So how to do this? Number one, let your audience's information needs guide your storytelling. This isn't about pushing your products and your services. This is about your audience's true needs in a time of urgency and a time of uncertainty. Extend this principle to your messaging, your positioning, your business objective. Let it be guided by your audience. Closely related to point number one is point number two. Don't assume that you already know all of your audience's information needs. Just because you have personas, which are instrumental, they are a baseline at a time like this. This is an unprecedented moment. Dig deeper, understand what your audience's information needs are in the here and now. And number three, this is a tip that I would say is a little bit more in hindsight, but I would encourage you to take it with you the next time there is an urgency situation or a situation that just has mega mainstream appeal. Realize that your first content marketing activity is really important. So choose it quickly, yet wisely. And the reason I say that is because when there is such mainstream attention on a subject matter, the content competition ramps really quickly. You've got all of your competitors, digging in and trying to get in on it very, very quickly. So it's important to strive for some sort of first comer advantage in the way that you help your audience. And that's why immediately we went to survey, we went to understanding our information, the information needs of our audience, and then moved to our next step, which brings me to the second section of my presentation today, which is channels. The goal around channels is to be able to match the right story to the right channel. So what we did, as I mentioned, we ran a survey, a few different surveys, customer success team, and our sales team. And then we used those findings to run a live Q&A broadcast. This was a broadcast that we assembled very rapidly. This was happening, I think, the second week of our quarantine. We assembled a handful of our more seasoned subject matter experts, people who are very used to being on the front lines and getting the hard questions. We put together a handful of slides for this that was just covering some of the major trends that we were seeing taking place in the market. We went through that in maybe 5 minutes, and then it was open. It was on the fly Q&A from our audience. Was there some risk in taking an approach like that? Sure. Because you don't always know what you're going to get asked, and you can't kind of tuck behind the wings and talk internally before you give your externally facing answer. But we really I think took the right steps to mitigate that risk in doing that survey. For instance, we had a good sense of what questions we were going to get asked. We already had formulated our thoughts on how we would respond to them. We had the right people on the line. And we were able to promote it really quickly. We didn't overthink any promotion. We just got it out there because this was the moment of being really direct and being very helpful and truly being a service to the industry. I would say that an example like this is really where the term authenticity in content marketing actually lives out. I think that's a term that gets thrown around a lot. And there's some hyperbole around it, but this is what I would say is truly authentic, truly a service to the industry, truly putting your audience's needs first. This was 100% audience driven. And so that was a key, I think, example of matching, again, story to channel. The channel being, sort of a rapid turnaround approach to a webinar. The other example I want to share with you is orchestration. Orchestration meaning empowering your internal teams to help you distribute content and distribute your messaging. So what we did in this case was, again, thinking about rapid turnaround and being a true service to the industry. A popular way that a lot of other companies in Sidecar space in engaging with our audience kind of historically and especially now is to leverage our customer data in aggregate and report on trends that are happening, in the space that we're working in. So again, our audience is digital marketers in retail. They have responsibility for managing their paid ads on channels like Google and Facebook and Amazon. And that's really Sidecar's sweet spot. So we have all of that ad performance data. And when we aggregate it, we can come up with trends in click-through rates and clicks and impressions, revenue, orders, all sorts of things that we leverage often to tell the story of how trends are shaping up in the ad space within retail. Our competitors are doing similar things. And so what we saw coming out in the market was other competitors who were spending seemingly quite a bit of time composing very beautified content pieces around what was happening, charts and data and analysis. And, we took a step back and said, why do we have to spend all the time on content production right now? Let's bypass that entirely. We will do the data analysis ourselves. However, we're going to turn all of that into stats and talking points and orchestrate it, empower our sales team, our customer success team, our press team with these talking points and stats, and take that to market. And that was how we were able to get this information out there very rapidly. And these stats and talking points, I mean, they're living in a Google Doc, and they are continually updated as the weeks have been unfolding and have been a popular tool for all of our teams to be using. So let's take a step back again and examine some of the lessons to learn from these examples. Again, here the goal is to be able to match a story to the right channel. Point number one to keep in mind is to communicate on channels that support rapid turnaround. These events are unfolding as we speak. Things were changing day by day. So think about channels that let you be very quick in how you distribute content. So orchestration, media relations, social media, podcasts, all the quick turnaround channels that let you get information out there quickly. These channels are all a part of our repertoire normally, and especially during this pandemic. Number two, flip seemingly long turnaround channels into rapid ones. That's how we went from a webinar to a live Q&A broadcast. So a webinar is normally a multi-week process. You know, you spend a few weeks promoting it and driving your audience to get there, all this time on your slides. Bypass all of that and go to live Q&A broadcast, and then all of a sudden a webinar becomes a rapid turnaround channel too. Number three, zig when everyone else zags on the obvious channels. And I'll call out email here in particular, and I know we have a lot of other great content to come in this webinar on email. One thing I'll say that's just, I think, especially relevant to the B2B audience, the tech audience, I mean, email is one of our key channels. This is, I think, a moment where you have to really be circumspect about avoiding exhausting your audience when all of these other companies out there in your space might be also reaching out to the same people with similar messaging. I mean, as soon as I can remember, even for myself, as soon as everything started to unfold, I was getting emails from all sorts of content marketing vendors, companies I haven't heard of, companies that maybe I heard of years ago, and they're coming out of the woodwork now, and they're just trying to reach out to me, and it just felt like, you know, just totally turns you off from listening to any of that messaging. So just be very mindful to avoid exhausting your audience on email. So for us, for instance, we have purposely not used email to message things like, here are your COVID-19 resources, and welcome to the new normal. That has not been a part of our mix at all. Instead, we have used email to promote our live Q&A broadcast. We used it to send the participants the recording at the end. And we've also been using email to communicate with our audience on matters beyond COVID-19, other matters that are still important to them this year, and matters that are still important to our 2020 content marketing plans. Okay, and this is my third and kind of final section. Beyond what I've said, you know, over the past few minutes, there is always your North Star, and this is your best practices that should ring true no matter what environment we are facing. And the goal here is to trust in those best practices. So I want to share a few that I think are particularly important at a moment like this. First of all, find the sweet spot of a great story. That is the combination of three elements: something you care about, something your audience cares about, and something you can add value to. This is always going to be the way to find the great story and the way for you to really focus on what you are an expert in as a company, and also putting, again, your audience needs first. Number two, bake in chaos time. And I'm sure the pandemic has felt very chaotic for a lot of us, just by nature of it. But take a step back and remember that chaos time is normal. Chaos time is a part of always, you know, the efforts that you're working on in content marketing. And honestly, to me, chaos time is normal, and it signals that you're prioritizing the most critical business need at hand. We actually at Sidecar, we call it chaos time. We bake chaos time into our timeline specifically. It's in our process docs. It's in our project management. It's specifically a tangible line item in how we go about our day. And that's how we have agility baked into what we do. So when it comes time for something where maybe the chaos elevates a bit, we already have that muscle to adapt and work with it. And third, best practice, operate with a shorter term lens, yet keep your ideal longer term plans in view. This again speaks to adaptability and agility, especially during a time of a pandemic when you can't really predict what's going to be taking shape in several weeks out, let alone a few months out. I mean, at Sidecar, we're used to doing quarterly planning, annual planning, but we also have a shorter term lens where we're looking forward just a few weeks, but keeping those longer term plans in view so that we can still aim to execute on them. And as I look back and I put together our 2020 content marketing plans at the end of last year. There were quite a number of what I call big rocks that we distributed throughout 2020. And we have executed actually on basically all of them still. And that's because we have found ways to adapt maybe some of the ways that we're executing, but the big rocks have still happened. And that's because we've kept both that short-term lens and that long-term lens in view. And that about wraps it up. Those are the best practices that I would love to leave everybody with. And if there's any Q&A, I'm happy to take any questions.
I had one question come up and come sort of over to me directly via email. So curious, what was going back to that shorter term, longer term lens? How did you balance the existing content you were working with the new COVID content? Was there a percentage that you eradicated? Were there some things that were in the works that you had to put on hold? Were there things that you prioritized because they're going to be so important for holiday, which is fast approaching the retailer, point of view? How did you balance those things?
So that's an excellent question. And at the time of everything starting to take shape, we were in the middle of kind of actually coming to sort of in the home stretch really of producing our benchmarks report. This is our #1 best performing piece of content. We've been producing it every year for the past 4 years. A very, very important piece of content for us. It's a report that we put out in late March, and we run a webinar with it. And there's a whole slew of other content marketing activities and promotion that starts coming out, in April and moving forward. So as things started to take shape, the report was nearly complete. But what we did do in that piece, because this is a report that looks at, again, going back to the metrics that I was mentioning, this is a report that looks at 2019 ad performance based on our, again, customer data, looking at the trends that have taken shape, and then giving insights into how do you sort of take some of these insights into 2020. Well, so many things are changing in 2020, and a lot of the insights that we had put together in this report may be different. So what we did do, instead of scrapping that report or rewriting it, I mean, that just didn't make sense for us either. So we decided to insert an editor's note at the beginning of the report, and the editor's note had some messaging around how the trends here are still going to be important as we move forward. And although there is uncertainty here, there's still value in looking back on what we have known as like these trends that take shape, and keeping them in mind as we do act in more kind of timely ways. So that was, I think, a way to make that report feel more relevant and not be tone deaf when we did go ahead and publish it. And then there were promotions that we still continue to roll out. And again, that was a big rock for us. And it's important to us from a marketing perspective. It's important to us from just like the marketing to sales handoff perspective and what we need to generate in the pipeline to then, warm up for sale. So it wasn't really an option to just like not do that. But we found that the interest when we published that report, we did a webinar around that report. The interest in it has been nearly the same height as the interest that we were getting at this time last year when there was no pandemic happening. So still a
very interesting.
Yep.
Okay, well, and we appreciate that, and I should full disclosure, we have the pleasure of working with Janelle and her team, and there's nothing better for a public relations team working on earned media placement than having phenomenal content to get started with. So I'm going to move on, and we'll talk a little bit about earned media.